Buying, selling, and maintaining an apartment requires consideration of multiple different aspects, and to ensure that you take the right steps, it is recommended to seek the legal services of an Israeli lawyer who is experienced in the field of real estate and taxation. Legal advice will prevent you from making mistakes before the sale of the apartment is a significant part of the success of the process of selling the apartment. Many apartment sellers make serious mistakes in the sale transaction process, and as a result, lose significant sums of money and miss the opportunity to improve housing and realize their full investment potential. Here are some important and helpful tips for selling or buying an apartment, as well as for proper conduct in the maintenance of a real estate property, in terms of professional inspections and financial responsibility. Legal status checks before selling an apartment. Before selling an apartment, it is important to check the legal status of the apartment, accompanied by an experienced Israeli lawyer in the field of real estate and taxation. The legal status of the property is reflected, among other things, in the wording of the taboo of the apartment as it appears in the land registry. The taboo. In order to carry out this examination in a good and expeditious manner, it is recommended, even before signing the sale agreement, to seek the professional services of an Israeli real estate lawyer who will review the wording of the taboo and approve the rights in case the apartment is registered elsewhere, and act to correct the registration. Accompaniment and legal advice in the process of selling an apartment. Before signing a sale agreement, the lawyer will check the legal status of the apartment on behalf of the buyer to make sure he can get a mortgage, and to ensure that at the end of the sale process, the registration of the apartment in the name of the buyer is completed successfully. There are cases where even though the seller has already completed the process of buying the apartment many years ago, he did not bother to register rights in his name as required at the end of the transaction. And as a result of this mistake, the apartment was not registered in his name. In such a case, when an attempt is made to arrange the registration of rights, it sometimes turns out that the buyer and his lawyer died many years ago. And such a simple action can become a complicated and complex legal case that will take resources, effort, and time. Funding. If in order to finance the purchase of an apartment you use a mortgage, it is recommended that you ask the bank in advance for a document called a mortgage balance report. If you attain a mortgage, you should be aware of the amount of the mortgage applied to your apartment and plan the financing of your next transaction accordingly. Furthermore, as a result of shifts in the mortgage interest rate, various repayment fees and penalties are paid to the bank even before the sale of the apartment. Taxes. In the process of selling an apartment, there are some major taxes that you may want to check before you sign the contract. High tax payments can significantly affect the economic viability of the transaction and sometimes make it unprofitable for you. Therefore, it is important to check in advance the amount of taxes and make your decision accordingly. Appreciation tax. The main tax that applies to the sale of an apartment is the praise tax. Appreciation tax is a tax paid to the tax authority and is imposed in accordance with the law on the seller of an apartment. The tax is calculated according to the difference between the purchase value and the sale value of the apartment and ranges at a rate of about 25%. For example, let's say you bought an apartment for 1,000,000 shekels. After a few years, you decided to sell it for 2,000,000 shekels. In this case, the difference in the amount is NIS 1,000,000, so you will be subject to a praise tax of 25%, which will reach NIS 250,000. But it is important to clarify, calculating praise tax is not that simple. The method of calculating the tax depends on many variables, including things such as the identity of the seller, the seller's holding period in the apartment, and the seller's entitlement to various exemptions or offsets in the amount of tax, in accordance with the provisions of the law. Improvement levy. Another type of tax that applies to apartment sellers is called the improvement levy. An improvement levy will be paid to the local authority or municipality. This tax is imposed on an increase in the value of the property as a result of various plans approved by the local authority that allow for increased building rights. For example, if the local authority has approved plans that allow an addition of 20 square meters in your apartment, an improvement levy will be paid. The rate of the levy may reach 50% of the value of the improvement, that is, half the value of the added building rights. Professional examination to examine the feasibility of the transaction. It is important to note that before selling the apartment, it is recommended to check and find out in advance the amount of taxes through the lawyer who represents you in the transaction. The lawyer will check the rate and amount of the tax in accordance with your characteristics and personal data, and that of the apartment, and will recommend a course of action that suits your needs. No doubt you do not want to get into a situation where, after signing an agreement to sell your apartment, you will suddenly find that you are required to pay tax in large amounts from each apartment sale transaction, and that you are left with significantly less profit than you initially thought, or no profit at all. A professional check in advance of the taxation applicable to the transaction will ensure that the sale of the apartment will be financially worthwhile for you. Apartment purchase. The process of buying an apartment is one that involves making many weighty decisions, especially for those who are buying an apartment for the first time. This is an extremely significant economic move to make, and it involves large sums of money, and includes dealing with a complicated, exhausting, and lengthy bureaucratic procedure. In order to complete a deal of buying an apartment successfully, it is important to plan every step, check every detail in advance, and prepare properly for the purchase of the apartment. Obtaining legal advice and guidance is essential, and especially helpful to seek out at the beginning stages of this process. The legal services include financial planning, maintaining the correct and desired conduct throughout the purchase process, and supervising financial and legal checks in order to prevent mistakes when signing the purchase contract and receiving the keys to your new home. Economic examination. It is recommended to carry out a comprehensive financial examination of all the financial means available to you for the purpose of buying the apartment. These measures include current accounts, deposits, study funds, loans, provident funds, and help from parents. These components constitute the initial equity available to you for the purchase of the apartment and the financial basis for the purchase transaction, but it is important to leave enough financial means aside for unforeseen expenses.